video, we're going to be talking about body language. Body language. So why does this matter? This matters for a lot of reasons, and we're going to break down what those are. So any salesperson or sales manager, whoever's watching this right now, you all know the feeling of the customer saying, yes, 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 sounds great, and you get to the end and they're definitely, seems like they're ready to buy. You've got a contract appointment sometime in the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, whatever it is, and then they never come back and you have no clue why that is, right? Like, the conversation you thought you were having and the experience they were having, those experiences did not line up, right? They're like, yes, 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 yes. And you get to the end, it's like, no, there was something you missed, right? And so the reason body language is important is because a lot of times the customer, maybe they're just trying to be polite, but they're not telling the truth. Not in a mean way, but they're not, right? You know, it's sort of like a little white lie. They don't want to hurt our feelings and say like, no, you suck and your product sucks and I hate you and I'm going to go buy from your competitor because they're amazing and you suck, right? They're usually not going to say that. Most people, they want to avoid confrontation, right? This is true in general. So this is one of the ways you avoid confrontation. Yeah, definitely, right? So let's talk about communication in general. You guys have probably heard these numbers before. The first time I heard these numbers, they were really a shock to me. There's something like, you hear different numbers, but there's something like that communication, human communication is 60% body language. We'll have BL for body language. So 60% body language, 30% tone, 10% words, right? And so the problem with this, well, I'm actually going to expand on this a little bit. Robert Greene, maybe you guys are familiar with him. He wrote 48 Laws of Power, Art of Seduction, Laws of Human Behavior. You know, he's got a bunch of amazing books. He's definitely an expert of human behavior. And he guesses that nonverbal communication is about 95% of all communication. So this guesses 90%, not words. He guesses 95% not words. I'm gonna make an argument that I think is even higher personally, right? Because this is body language, tone, and words, right? But we're not factoring in for their energy, right? What is that communicating? What are we feeling when we're near them, right? And so, in my opinion, if you start to factor that in, it's probably like 99% nonverbal. And for, you know, many thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, human beings, we didn't have verbal communication, right? And so this is something that we kind of innately do and understand, but we don't always really realize. And so we want to be able to use this to our advantage, right? So whether the nonverbal part of communication is 90% or 95% or 99%, it's a big number, right? So we would want to know what's going on with that. And so in sales, you've got the salesperson up there, right? So normally the salesperson is going 100% off words, right? We're going off what the prospect is saying and what we're saying and what they're saying, and we're putting all of our emphasis on that, right? And so let's say of the words, maybe we're catching, I don't know, let's say we're getting all of the words. We're really understanding exactly what they're saying, which we're probably not. Let's say if we're getting half the words, in this example, that'd be 5%, right? So that means that you're getting maybe 5% of the communication that's happening, and you're missing the other 95%. And this is really interesting, right? Because you would sort of think that this would be taught more often, because if these numbers are true, if the nonverbal communication is somewhere 90, 95, maybe even 99% possibly, then you would sort of think that we would want to study that and we would want to train on that and we would want to understand what's happening, but we don't, right? I'm not exactly sure why that is, but we don't. And so on that sales presentation, that salesperson is understanding maybe 5% of what's going on. And so as you can imagine, if you only understand 5% of what's going on, the odds that you're going to be able to close effectively, it's tough because you sort of have no clue what's going on. You're sort of like, you know, flailing in the dark, right? Because you just don't have the information you need. And there's some other problems with this, right? So another problem with this information is that words are very, very easy to edit, right? I'm thinking of the words I want to say right now, easy for me to talk and edit, right? Whatever I'm saying, I can communicate and I can change and try to think, okay, what words best explain this? It's a very conscious form of communication, or at least relatively speaking, it's pretty conscious, right? We're thinking of the words we want to say and we say them, something like that, right? But with body language and tonality, not only are they 90, 95, 99% energy, right? So nonverbal, not only is there all that stuff going on, but these are really hard to edit. Tonality, you could sort of edit a little bit, but most people are not good at that. Body language, most people have no clue what their body language is saying, and they're not deliberately editing it at all because that takes a huge amount of skill. And then even if they're like an actor or someone who really has this skill that they've studied body language and they know how to edit it and all these things, they're still gonna have these little micro expressions or these reactions where their body or their expressions are going to do something and show something before they really have time to edit it. So no matter how good you are at body language, you're still gonna let out information of what you're really thinking. So most people have no clue what that is. They're not editing it, and even if they're really good at editing it, which almost nobody is, they're still letting out information. And with the body language, this is the information that's true. That's what they're really thinking. That's what they're really thinking, that's what they're really feeling. And so when sales really started to change for me, if I had to pick one thing, which is hard because we've got all these videos and there's obviously lots of things, but if I had to point to one thing that massively changed for me, it was that I stopped listening to what the prospect was saying. Not that I wasn't listening, but I wasn't putting as much weight in it, right? So most salespeople are putting 100% of their weight on the words, weight of what that person is communicating on the words, and they're basing how they move through that process based on the words the customers are saying. But as we talked about, there's a lot of things the customer is gonna be saying that, may not be how they're really thinking and feeling, but it's easy to edit, and so they do. So I stopped listening to what they were saying, relatively speaking, right? I put less emphasis on what they were saying, and I put almost all the emphasis on their body language. I learned to watch and I learned to understand, and I read a bunch of books on body language, and I was just like, okay, well, if this is 90 to 95 to 99% of the human communication, then maybe what I really need to be doing is to watch this, especially because it's very hard to edit and it's more accurate. Right? It's like, that's what they're really thinking and feeling. Their body language isn't fake. So if you want to know what somebody is thinking and feeling, then you have to know this. And so we're gonna talk mostly about the customer's body language. We're gonna talk a tiny bit about your body language as well. But that's what's gonna be the topic of this video. And this is why this is important. So hopefully with this little introduction, you can see, okay, yeah, maybe I am focusing too much on the words. Maybe I gotta know what this is so I can know what that customer's thinking. The unedited version, not what they tell you they're thinking, but what they're actually thinking, because that's what we need to know to be able to move with them, to do that dance towards the sale, right? And so I'm going to delete some of this here. All right, so with body language, I would say the first important thing to understand is something called baselining. So what is baselining? Baselining means that each person has their own sort of default body language of the way that they always are, right? And so when you first meet somebody, you want to try to get a sense of like, how are they moving their body and what seems to be like their default mode. Because with body language, really the most important thing about it is we're looking for changes, right? We're looking for changes that they just became more negative towards us or more positive towards us. But we can't really know that if we don't know their baseline. So sort of think of their baseline, that's their norm, right? And within baseline, you also want to consider not just their norm, but the environment norm, right? Like maybe if somebody's going like this, it might not mean they're mad or they're insecure. It might be freezing outside, right? And maybe they're going like that because it's freezing outside. So there can be other things in the environment. You want to keep in mind what's going on in the environment, what would be appropriate for the environment, and then what seems to be the baseline of this person. Are they naturally tense? Are they naturally open? Are they naturally closed? Are they naturally anxious? What's going on with them? So then as you watch them, you can see, oh, they just got a little more receptive to what I'm saying, or they just got a little less receptive to what I'm saying, because based on that baseline that I'm watching for, something just changed. So baseline. And again, it might take a minute, but you'll sort of, if you're really watching, you should be able to figure it out this pretty quickly. Like, oh, they maybe are a sort of anxious type of person or whatever. And you're wanting to go the deviations off that. Did they go a little this way? Did they go a little that way? And you're looking for those changes, right? Because those changes can tell you something about how they're thinking and feeling. Okay, so that's the first thing. So I think what will be helpful at this point is maybe just to go sort of body part by body part and just share a little bit of body language and a lot of the things that I would watch for that really helped me. And so you guys can use this for yourself too. And then I'm gonna share a tiny bit of what you can be thinking about for your own body language as well to make it more effective, because they're also watching you and they're also processing you. And they may not think like, oh, I'm watching for their body language, right? But maybe at a subconscious level, they might think, oh, something is not right with this person. I don't know what it is. There's a very high likelihood it's that your body language is off. That's what they're processing. They just don't know how to pin it. They don't know how to say, oh yeah, that's what that is, right? So why don't we start with the feet. So guys, the feet is a really, really, really important one. It's extremely helpful. It's pretty obvious. This is one that I would use a lot. So the easiest, probably most helpful, most common part of this one that I would say, direction of the feet, right? So our feet point in the direction of our interests. So for example, if we're afraid of something or we're disapproving of something, we don't like something, we feel threatened by something, we don't like how something is going, our feet are gonna tend to point away from that so we can potentially run away like from a predator, right? If our feet are pointed towards something, it means we like it, we're receptive to it, we wanna move towards something. So if you're, like, I'll give you a silly example, right? It's like sometimes when I would come back to the desk and we're kind of trying to close things out, I would look under the desk to see if their feet are pointed towards me or away from me, right? And so you never ever want to ask for the sale if the customer's feet are pointing away from you, because it means they're not interested. They're going to say no for sure, right? So anytime you notice the customer's feet are pointed away from you, you know, high likelihood something is off, right? Unless they're off looking at the product that you're showing them and their feet are pointing towards that, right? But for the most part, if you guys are interacting and their feet are pointing away from you, they're not feeling very comfortable. If their feet are pointing towards you, they are feeling more comfortable, right? And so watch for the direction of the feet. It can really help you to know, okay, they're being receptive to me, we can keep going this way, or okay, there's something is off. I either gotta backtrack or we gotta do something else because something's not right, okay? And remember, body language, these are things you can count on. These are things that are really how they're thinking and feeling. Another one is called like happy feet. So sometimes if people are kind of like, their feet are kind of bouncing up and down like this, that can be sometimes when they're getting excited. So if you see them doing that, may mean that they're excited about what you're showing them. Sometimes you'll see someone with their legs kind of crossed. Sometimes you'll see someone with their leg crossed and their foot sort of bouncing like this, you know? That's usually like impatience, anxiety, you know, not really happy with how things are going. Bouncing foot like that, or the tapping foot, right? Sort of like anxiety, like I want to get out of here, right? They're tapping it on the ground. So bouncing foot, tapping. So say direction, happy feet is good, this is not good. If their feet are pushed really close together and they sort of look like they're like pressing on each other, or I guess even if one is pressed down on the other, anything like that, probably more of an anxiety thing. They're not comfortable. So if you see them doing that, putting pressure, it's almost like a self-soothing kind of thing to put that pressure there. So if you see that happening, not good, something's off, you need to pivot a little bit. So I'll say like feet together or the pressure. So guys, the feet that's a really, really, really helpful one. You can always watch their feet, watch for the directionality. You're always gonna get a sense of what that means. Pretty obvious, pretty easy to see. Sometimes, like I said, even at the very end, you're at the table, you're trying to close things out. This sounds really silly, but sometimes I would like drop something and I will look under the table to kind of see what their feet are doing, and that would give me a good idea of how receptive they are to me in that moment. So don't ask for the sale if their feet are pointing away. Don't keep going with the same pacing and thing that you're doing if they seem to be doing some of these negative foot things, and be willing to pivot, be willing to take that as important information. That's how they're really thinking and feeling. So let's say if their feet are going away from you, but they're saying like, yeah, this sounds so great, right? Then that's not true. They're not really thinking that this sounds so great. You have to go with the feet. The body language will always trump the words. So body language is how we're really feeling. It's extremely hard to edit. The words are easy to edit. And so put your emphasis on the body language. You see any of these things, put your emphasis on that. All right, so let's look at another one. Let's look at legs. Maybe a couple quick things about the legs. What does that mean? So with the legs, usually if the legs are crossed and like pushed really tightly against each other, it's usually something negative, especially if it's like, if you see the bottom parts of their legs below the knees sort of crossed like this, that would be sort of a high anxiety thing. If you see them put, sometimes a really high anxiety, nervousness, insecure thing will be, you see like somebody sitting down on a chair and they sort of wrap their feet around the chair with their legs like that. That's a really high anxiety thing. If you see your buyers doing that, they're extremely uncomfortable in that moment. Anything where their legs are like really tightly pressed together, anything that pressed together, that tension is usually a discomfort, kind of like a trying to self-soothe, like maybe it's almost like a fight or flight thing in a way, like they want to get out of there, they don't feel comfortable. You know, sometimes some body language, like sometimes for a woman, you know, she may cross her legs in a certain way that might be normal, comfortable for her. So you sort of have to pay some attention. When someone's legs are crossed, another thing you can look at is you can look at the feet with the legs, right? So if, let's say a woman, she crosses her legs, that's sort of a common, you know, body language for them to do, it's comfortable. If the foot is pointing towards you, that main foot that's down is pointing towards you, that's good, they're interested. If their legs are crossed and the foot's pointing away, not good, right? So you sort of want to look for, is there that intense pushing of the legs together? Is it like the legs behind the chair? Anything that's like that tension like that is not good, they're not comfortable. Like I said, with the legs crossed, you could look for where that outward foot is pointing. Another thing you can look for is sometimes people will put their legs far apart like this, sort of like the policeman pose, right? Like where they're like this and their legs are far apart. When you see someone with their legs far apart like that, it's sort of like a power stance or a I'm not intimidated by you kind of thing, which is obviously negative, right? So if you see them doing that, their legs far apart, then not good, right? So basically with the legs, I would say you're watching for extreme tension. Wrapping behind the chair, it's a common one that they do when they're anxious. Behind chair. I would say those are a couple of the main ones to watch for with the legs, so those will help. Torso, this one's pretty straightforward, but still worth mentioning. So with the torso, watch for the direction that their torso is pointed towards you, right? So specifically the belly button, we want to look for those vitals, right? Belly button's like one of the vital parts of the body. So if somebody's talking with you and they're like, yeah, you know, I really like this house or this car or, you know, this finance package or, you know, whatever they're talking about, whatever it is that you're selling. If they're saying, yeah, they like it, but you see their belly button pointed kind of away from you, whether it's off to this way, off to this way, off to this way, whatever it is, if they're saying they like something and their belly button is pointing away from you, it's not true. They do not like that thing. And you're gonna need to back up, or you're gonna need to be like, you know, are you sure? Like, is there anything else we're missing? Like, you know, you might need to backtrack a little bit. You might need to kind of figure out something is off. So again, body language over the words, right? So you're not listening to as much the words, you're putting the weight, the emphasis, the meaning of what they're saying more heavily on the body language, and watch for the direction the torso's pointed, for the stomach, right? The belly button, and put emphasis on that. All right, I'm gonna delete some of this here so we have some more space. All right, lips. What do the lips mean? What's going on with their lips? So usually with the lips, some things that can help you is if their lips are looking really thin, like the blood is sort of drained out of their lips, not good, right? They're not comfortable. Versus if their lips look fuller, there's more blood that's there, they're sort of feeling more comfortable. You can look for the lips sort of disappearing versus out. So if they're sort of like going like this, they're doing something where their lips are not there, right? You see them doing that, they're not comfortable typically. Typically something is off, something is wrong there. You want to remember all these things in terms of baselining, right? So they've got their baseline, their way that they always are, and then you say something and maybe they go like, right? So it's like something just happened there. There was something happened that they didn't like what you just said, and you need to see that and adjust around that. Another thing, at least within the context of sales, in this context, biting the lip, I think is sometimes like a thinking thing. Like you might say something and they're like, you know, like they're kind of doing that thing where they sort of like get part of their lip and you can sort of tell like they're thinking, right? And so sometimes they need a moment. You need to be silent and let them think, right? So these are just some little things, at least with the lips, that you can look out for. Okay, eyes. Eyes, this is a little bit of a more subtle one, a little bit trickier, but still helpful. So I think the first and most obvious thing is, are they watching you, right? Are their eyes on you? If their eyes are on you and they're taking everything in, most likely that's a good thing, right? Depends on how they're looking at you. But for the most part, if you've got their eyes, you've probably got their attention, and for the most part, that's probably a good thing. Versus, you know, if they're like really not looking at you at all, refuse to look at you, it could just be because they're scared and they're anxious and stuff, but it's also not a good sign, right? It means you're not in rapport. It means they're kind of freaking out. They're uncomfortable, right? So part of it is, you know, I'll say contact, eye contact, right? Are they looking at you? You can sort of tell if the eyes are like hard or soft, you know? This might be a little more in a romance thing than in a sales thing, but I think you can still kind of notice it in sales. I think you still notice if the person's eyes just have seemed like a hardness to them. It's a little hard to describe, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. They have like a hardness to them, or like a toughness or unpleasantness to them, where you can tell you're being looked at with some animosity, right? So not a good sign, right? Versus if their eyes are softer, they just sort of seem more gentle, more receptive to you, comfortable with you. So you sort of want to look for that. And if their eyes seem really tense and hard, you know, maybe you need to backtrack, maybe you need to look at something else, maybe you need to ask some more questions, you know, but you want to take that data as important, right? So I'll say hard versus soft, the eyes. And then maybe you guys have heard this one before, maybe not, but it's a great one. The pupils. So pupils, right, the black part in the middle of the eye, you can watch the pupils. Now this might sound like, oh, how the heck am I gonna be able to see somebody's pupils during sales and you know, pivot myself around that? That's too nuanced, but you actually can. So for the pupils, what you're watching for is if they're really contracted versus dilated. So if they're really contracted, you know how they have like those little beady, tiny black spots in the middle of the eye, how they get like that, like little black beads? That's called snake eyes. Snake eyes. So if the pupils are really contracted and they look like little black dots in their eyes, it means that they're trying to contract because they're wanting to take less light in, because they're not happy with what they're seeing. They sort of like are wanting to distance themselves from what's in front of themselves. Versus if they are augmented, if they're bigger, then it's like the pupil is trying to dilate and to let more light in because they do like what they're seeing and they're comfortable. So let's say you're near the end and you're thinking about asking for the sale, and you see they had these tiny little beady like black snake eyes. You know, of course, you want to keep in mind the environment, right? How much lighting is in the room, because sometimes, like we said, the environment can affect it. But if their eyes look really, really tiny, there's a good chance that something is off, and you may need to backtrack, you may need to figure out what might be wrong with them. Versus if their pupils are really dilated, the black part is big in the middle, typically that's a sign that they're comfortable, that they're being receptive to you, and that's a good sign. So eyes, it's a little bit of a subtle one, but those are some good things to help you. Again, these are all just tools that you're using to pivot as the sale is happening, the dance to the sale, and you're needing to know at every moment, okay, what is this person thinking so that I can know how to pivot around them? These are all the things you're watching for, and remember, these things are more important than their words because they can edit their words, they can't edit this. This is how they're really feeling. Okay, let's talk about the hands. So the hands are pretty dynamic. There can be a lot that's going on with the hands. There's a lot of different body language things of the way somebody can move, right, with their hands. So let's go through some of those. So some of the common ones that I would see, if the person's going like this and their head is like rested on their hand, you can see how all the weight is on there, then that means they're bored. So the weight, that's sort of a lot to write, but if the weight of the head is on the hand, then that's bored. But if they're going like this, do you see how this is different? How there's not the weight of my head, there's just like a tiny bit. That means they're thinking. So you can watch for those things. If they're like this, thinking, if they're like this, they're bored, right? There's a difference in the weight of the head. You know, if they're going like this, you know, holding up their head, anything that's like the weight of the head on the hand, usually not good, usually means, you know, they're bored versus thinking, right? Like this, thinking, right? Most people, that's kind of an obvious one. Another good one that might not be quite as obvious, drumming fingers. This is another common one you'll see, that you'll ask for the sale and the person will be going like this, right? I'm sure you've seen it before. So when someone is doing that, they're thinking, they're like, like they're trying to come to an answer. Do not interrupt them when they're doing that. Let them think. They're trying to make a decision. They're about to make a decision, and the decision might be yes, right? If the decision is no, you might need to backtrack and kind of bring things forward again. But if they're doing that, it's usually you just ask them an important question they're thinking. So let them think in that moment. Don't talk. Let them think. Okay, this is a good one that is subtle, but when you know how to look for it, it's pretty obvious, and this is a very helpful one. Disappearing thumbs. So really, guys, disappearing anything is not good. Whenever something is there and then it's not there, they just became uncomfortable with something. So let's say, you know, you can see their hands, I'm holding mine up because of the camera, but they go like this, right? You notice like the thumb disappears into the fingers. Maybe you can even notice that you might do this. This is an anxiety thing that I do. Sometimes my mom calls me out, hey, you know, you just did that thing that you said was about anxiety. It's an anxious thing. So when someone does this, maybe everything's flowing and then you notice, boom, something just happened there. There was something that they didn't like, right? So anything disappearing, arm behind the back, the two hands behind the back, a lot of people think this is good body language. For the most part, it's not good body language. Maybe if you kind of want to look tough, you know, or something like this. But in terms of like person-to-person communication and having people be receptive to you, if you're putting your hands behind your back, anytime where you're not showing your hands, that's considered bad body language. It's considered anxious. It's considered like you're hiding something. There's something you don't want the person to know. So, you know, it's a little different. Someone's in sporting events and they're playing the national anthem and they're going like this. That's different. But in general, if you're communicating with somebody, especially let's say for sales, communicating with the prospects, and they're doing this or you're doing this, it's going to make the other person feel uncomfortable that they can't see your hands. And that goes back to probably ancient times, you know, in our hand is where we have a weapon, right? So you can't see your hands, you don't trust you. So when you notice the person's hand disappearing, not good, something just happened. This is a simple one, but still important, right? So crossed arms versus not crossed arms. Now maybe everybody's like, oh yeah, I know what that means, but I don't think people put enough emphasis on it. Whenever you see your customer doing this, this is really, really bad. It means they are really not comfortable with something. So this is a barrier, right? This barrier between me and you, me and the camera. And it's also like a self-hug. It's like a self-soothing thing. So anytime something's a barrier, anytime something is self-soothing, it's uncomfortable. And the more tight this is, or that they might be going like this, right? The more tight that is, the more uncomfortable they are. And so you really want to watch for that. Anytime they do that, definitely something's wrong. Again, you might have to backtrack, you might have to tweak something. They're not comfortable. They're like, yeah, you know, I think this is the house for me, or the car for me, or the package of service for me, or whatever. No, there's something that was missed. So you absolutely have to notice that, and you have to either backtrack, you have to ask them, like, are they sure? Like, is everything okay? Like, is there anything that we might be missing right now? Is there anything in this that is not right? You know, because there's not something right. You might think, oh, I don't want to take myself out of the sale by doing that. If somebody's doing this, they're not gonna buy, guaranteed. So watch for that, super important, put a lot of weight on that. Another one, pretty obvious, but again, I think a lot of times people think they know these things, but they're not putting weight on them, and it's really important to put weight on these. So are their hands clenched versus open, right? Clenched versus open. If you notice that their hands are kind of clenched, that there's tension there, something is off. They're not comfortable. If their hands are more open, that's good. If they are showing their palms and showing their wrists, then that's a good sign, right? When we show our wrists, it means that we're comfortable. It's another like vital point or vital sign. And when we show our palms, it sort of means like, hey, you know, we're not hiding anything. We don't have any weapon. We don't have anything bad, right? And so it's a little hard for you to see on camera me doing this and showing my palms and my wrists. But if you can see this, it means they're comfortable with you. If they can't, if they're hiding their wrists, hiding their palms, disappearing hands, all of those are not a good sign. So those are a lot of ones with the hands. I would say the biggest one by far is, guys, you will see this. You will see this every single day. You might see it multiple times a day, right? When someone does this is extremely important. You do not ask for the sale at that time. If they're saying something positive, like, yes, I like it, you do not believe them at that time. You have to clarify. You have to make sure everything is good. Hey, is there anything that we're missing? Is there anything that you don't like about this, right? Because there is something that they don't like about that, and that has to be solved before a sale can happen. So we need to know that. And you know, sometimes if we're only putting the emphasis on the words and then they end up leaving and we think they're coming back, guys, if they're doing this, they're not coming back, I promise. So that's important. So those are some of the stuff with the hands. I want to share a couple more things for you guys to watch for that are going to be helpful with the body language. Okay, one really important one that I think is a pretty obvious one that says a lot is proximity. Proximity, what do I mean by that? How close or how far away is that person to you or to the thing you're talking about? So let's say that person's very close to you, right? Not awkwardly close, but like, you know, they're kind of sticking with you, right? Typically it's a good sign. Typically it means they're pretty receptive to you, right? But let's say you're there and they're over here and they really refuse to get any closer to you. They're keeping like a really big distance. That's usually not a good sign, right? Proximity is a great one, that we tend to physically draw closer to things that we're interested in and physically take ourselves away from things that we're not interested in. So if they're staying close to you, good sign, more likely you're in rapport, more likely they're being receptive, more likely they're interested. If there's this big gap, more likely they're not. It can also be proximity within relation to the thing you're selling. Like let's say if you're selling a car and say here's the person still, and let's say the car is right here, and let's say they're like going inside the car and they're touching it and they're like, oh wow, yeah, you know, like they're sort of physically near the car or in the car or whatever, right? They're touching it, they're near it, they're experiencing it. That proximity, that's good. That means something good is happening there. If you're trying to show them something, a house, a car, or clothing, or jewelry, or whatever it is that you're showing them, whatever you're selling, and there's sort of like them over here and the car over here, and they sort of like keep this distance, like they don't want to go near it. The proximity tells you a lot. They're not interested, right? So you can always watch for how close is that person to you physically or far away? How close does that person get physically, or how far away from what it is that you're showing them? And watch for that proximity. That's going to be really, really helpful for you being able to tell how interested they are. Another really good one, barriers. This is all sort of body language slash nonverbal communication, right? So anytime a barrier, so remember there's baselining, right? Anytime a barrier is placed between you and that person, that's not good. They're trying to distance themselves. Barriers mean we're trying to create distance. Anytime a barrier is removed, it means that we're trying to get closer because there's interest, right? So let's say that you're at your little desk and you're trying to close something out, and that person puts like a pen in between you guys, or a piece of paper, or a folder, or something, right? They put it in between you. You can know that something just happened. Something is probably wrong because they just created this barrier. Now, on the other hand, maybe you sit down and there's stuff on the desk, and maybe you notice that they take something away, right? They take something, or there was a pen there and they move the pen to the side. Then that can tell you that they're wanting to remove the barrier. They're wanting to be closer. So this can happen while you're out and about walking around. This can happen while you're sitting down at a desk. It can happen in lots of ways. But anytime that there's any kind of barrier that is put between you and someone else, typically not good if you're trying to influence them, right? But if the barrier is taken away, now there's more connection between you, right? So whether I said like pen, paper, folder, could be anything. Watch for those moments because those moments are significant. So barriers getting out of the way, more connection. Barriers being placed there, less connection, like they need some space. They're trying to literally create some space, right? Mirroring. Mirroring. So when we are feeling receptive to one another, we tend to sort of copy each other, right? We tend to do this in our words, our tonality, and our body language. So you might notice that you feel like you're in pretty good rapport, and then you start moving a certain way and they start moving a certain way. Or you start using certain words, they start using certain words. Or you laugh and your laugh has a certain sound to it, and they laugh and their laugh has a certain sound to it, right? So like a mimicking, right? So if you notice that person doing that they seem to sort of be very in sync and sort of copying your demeanor of words you're using, the pacing of how you're kind of speaking, your tonality, your body language, that's a good sign. It means you guys are really in rapport. So you can really put a lot of weight on that if you seem to really be clicking in that way. If you seem to really be the opposite of that, you want to pay attention to that too. Like one of you is talking super fast, one is slow, using totally different words, body language totally different, one is super open, one is super closed. It's like watch for those mismatches, right? Because then you can tell, okay, something is off. We're not in sync the way we need to be right now, right? And remember, whenever anything is off, we might have to backtrack, or we might need to clarify. We might need to hey, sure, is this good? Like, is there something we're missing? Is there anything that's off? Is there anything you would change? Is there anything that needs to be better about this? Is there anything that this doesn't have that we still need to find, right? Because their body language has told you that the answer is yes. So that's another thing to look for. Okay, so another quick thing that I want to add to proximity, I guess we sort of spoke about it a little bit, but I just want to make sure I say it, is touch, right? So you want to be careful with touch, right? You want to be careful with touching people. I would say for the most part, don't touch people. But if someone like sort of maybe puts their hand on your shoulder, a lot of times somebody might do something, it's a proximity thing, wanting to be nearer. If that person, you're showing someone a home and you're like, hey, look at this kitchen, and they're like touching the kitchen and touching the granite and touching everything, right? Part of the proximity. So you want to look for touch or lack of touch, right? If the person's sort of not wanting to touch anything, like they're in a museum, it might be because they're just trying to not have that proximity, or they're feeling nervous or whatever. But touch is another thing you can look for in proximity. So what about facial expressions? So facial expressions, there's a lot going on there, right? There's a lot that could be said about facial expressions. It's probably something that I could honestly study more of, but I wanna just give some general tips that will help. And some of it we talked about a little bit already with the lips and the eyes. But with facial expressions, basically there's always gonna be a micro reaction where the face shows what it really feels before it's able to adjust and try to hide that. And so if you're watching people very closely, you'll get a little grimace of like they'll show a tiny bit of disapproval and then they'll try to cover it up with approval, right? So watch very carefully and you will get those little moments, those initial moments of them showing how they're really feeling. I would say for the most part, some general rules with facial expressions, anything that's sort of contracting or disappearing or tense, right, is usually not good, is usually uncomfortable. And then anything that's sort of relaxed, fuller, more open versus kind of condensing, that tends to be more positive facial expressions. So you can watch for that. You know, does their face look tense? Does their face look relaxed? Does it look like it's sort of collapsing in on itself, or does it look kind of full and comfortable? And those are cues for you as well. All right, so those are some things of body language. Those are a lot of things that really helped me. So to summarize all that, remember, you want to put a lot less emphasis on the words. Put maybe 5-10% emphasis of what they're saying, what they're communicating on their words. Put maybe 90 to 95% of what they're communicating, what they're saying, the meaning of it, the significance of it on the body language. Baseline, right? Watch for what their norm seems to be. Watch for changes, positive or negative. And then remember, the dance to the sale. So we're shifting around that. We're noticing, okay, they're going a little this way, a little this way. I need to come with them a little this way. We got to go a little this way. And you're moving with them. And the more that you really, really watch for all these things, and the more you're putting the emphasis on it and you're adjusting yourself around it, then the better things are going to be. I do want to share very, very briefly about your own body language. So I would say in general for sales, or whenever you're trying to persuade somebody of something, usually you want very open, calm, relaxed, confident, approachable body language, right? So I would always sort of have pleasant, open body language, and I would be very deliberate in showing my hands and my wrists, like talking with my palms open and my wrists open so that the customer could see. I would always talk like this. So when you're talking like this, again, you can't fully see because of the camera, but it's really promoting trust. It's like, oh, I like this person, I trust them, they seem very trustworthy. Versus if you're talking to your prospect like this, or your hands in your pockets, or bad posture, or all of these different things that salespeople tend to do, it's gonna make the customer uncomfortable, right? So there's their body language, we have to understand what they're thinking, but there's also our body language. So remember, open, calm, confident, approachable, talking with your hands and showing your wrists, kind of like that, with your wrists up so that they can see. And I sort of have like down at an angle, like near my waist, kind of right around there. And that's gonna make the people feel more comfortable, like, oh, I like this person. Now, you also want to notice your body language in terms of matching theirs, right? Which we already talked about with rapport. One other very quick thing I want to share with your own body language is there are times where you want to actually be a little more forceful. So a quick tip to help you with that is, let's say maybe near the end of the sale where you're sort of wanting to make a point, or there might be times where you're wanting to make a point, or maybe you're trying to keep your backlog of deals together and you have to talk in a more authoritative way. You can place your palms down. So you can notice if I'm like, hey guys, this is the body language video, and you're seeing my hands and wrists, it's like, oh, I feel very comfortable adjusting. But if I'm like, hey, like if I flip my hands, this is like authoritative. So if you need to say something authoritative and you really need them to listen, sometimes you will need to do that. But for the most part in sales, this type of body language, open, showing the hands, showing the wrists, it will make them feel comfortable. And so I'm sure there's more that could be said for body language, right? It's a giant topic, nonverbal communication. But I just wanted to get at a lot of the big things that I think will come up for you in sales, that if you know all these things, it will massively, massively increase your sales. Because remember, you're going from operating on 5% of what's actually happening. How the heck could you possibly know if you're serving them right? And how could you possibly close them when you only know 5% of what just happened? Versus, if we can get anywhere near 100%, which we probably can't, but we could get way closer by studying body language, all of a sudden we actually know what's going on. We can actually shift with them more effectively, which means we can close more effectively, which means we're gonna leave a lot less on the table. So that's body language. Hope that was helpful. This is something that's massively impactful for me, and we're gonna move on to the next lesson.